Mark Brennan of Fight On State here with Greg Pickel of FOS. We're recapping Penn State Football Media Day. I have the big giant scoreboard behind us. It was lit up a little while ago, but not right now. A lot of player interviews going on the field out here not so long ago. James Franklin, the coordinators, all having a chance to meet the media. I have to say a couple of things that jumped out to me real quickly. When you talk about James Franklin winning press conferences, wow, he really had a good time in that thing today. The coordinators, they were good, but I'm not sure how much we were able to get out of them. Listen, they're starting practice today. As we tape this, it's Monday, so I'm not really sure how much they had to say. And we didn't get quite as long with the players as we have in the past. I'm not complaining about it, just saying that that's kind of the way things were. But a lot of time with James Franklin, and he was really kind of on top of his game, having a lot of fun with this thing. Happy to have his family back in State College. What were some of the things, Greg, that you have some notes on there?
Yeah, you know, James Franklin was up to the task today, he really was. And the thing that stood out to me, Mark, was the idea that, you know, whether he was thrown something that he's been thrown over the last 3 weeks, where, you know, 2 weeks where he's done upwards of 20 hours of interviews, or whether it was something that was, you know, off the wall and off topic, you know, he was always ready for it. And I think that's something that when people talk about how well he does in these settings, that's why. What stood out? Let's start with James Franklin. You know, he said a lot of things today, a lot of things we've heard at Big Ten Media Days, we heard on ESPN. I didn't really hear a whole lot new. You know, he talked a little bit, and the coordinators did as well, about Michael O'Connor being very much improved. I thought that was interesting. Everyone knows Christian Hackenberg's the guy, but now you know, we're talking about what happens if something went wrong with Christian Hackenberg, and it's a plausible fact, you know, plausible thing to discuss because, well, we talked about an offensive line, and that was talked about a lot today as well, that really, you know, needs to do a lot of improvement. But Donovan Smith, I spoke with him a little bit about just that fact, the idea that the offensive line has been beaten up, quite frankly, by a lot of people over, you know, the course of the spring and now the off season as well. And he said that's motivation for them, and I think you'd expect him to say that. But you know, the quote he said was, you know, people are going to talk about you, whether it's good or bad. As long as they're talking about you, it's a good thing.
One thing though, real quick on the offensive line.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to talk to Herb Hand about the offensive line, but James Franklin, he was given a couple of opportunities to address the so-called shortcomings of the offensive line, and he really did not back down from the comments that he had made in the spring that they definitely have some issues in some different areas, and that's one of them. I mean, Donovan Smith could say, what else is he going to say?
Right.
This thing, of course he's going to say that, you know, they're going to use it as motivation, but when you only have one returning starter, that is something to be really concerned about, especially with a guy like Christian Hackenberg. I talked to Ricky Ronnie, quarterback's coach, and said, you have to adjust anything you're doing with the QBs based on the fact that you have a relatively inexperienced offensive line. And he said, absolutely not. Once you start doing that, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So, yeah, keeping Hackenberg healthy is really key. But the stuff they were saying about O'Connor, I'm anxious to see what we could see of him in practice. Right. He looked good to me in the spring, but obviously, listen, when you're talking about Hackenberg, who's already established himself as an elite level QB, right, it's going to be imperative to keep him healthy.
Oh, without question. There's no doubt about it. I did talk to Herb Hand for a little bit about his offensive line, and he did say that, you know, he had this sort of situation at Tulane where they only had one returning starter. And he was quick to say that, you know, having experienced that already, you know, doesn't really, you know, affect the way he thinks about this coming into it. His words now, or my words now, rather than his now. You know, that's Tulane. This is the Big Ten. Obviously, the level of competition is a little bit different. And he didn't, you know, he said it, you know, some of those experiences will help him, and I'm sure they will. In terms of being able to know, you know, the limitations and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, this is an offensive line that it needs a lot of work and needs a lot of luck, and no one here today tried to hide that fact.
Yeah, let's switch over to the other side of the ball. We talk about Christian Hackenberg and how important he is. On defense, Mike Hull is that guy. They've moved to the middle linebacker. We learned today that he has a peanut head, right, which was, you know, that's what James Franklin said. And the reason he brought that up is because when Franklin talks about his prototype players, he wants big, long, you know, guys with big heads and big feet and big hands and long arms. And clearly that's not Mike Hull. He's kind of undersized. But he, number one, he's ridiculously strong. Anybody who was at Lift for Life saw that when he benched 225 over 30 times in the middle of that competition. And he's a really smart guy. They really need him in the middle of that defense. And he's, to me, keeping him healthy is every bit as important as keeping Christian Hackenberg healthy. One thing that Bob Shoop, the defensive coordinator, talked about, and I asked him, is we've heard a lot about this star position. And, you know, what is that? How is that going to come into play? And he said that could be you know, that's kind of that hybrid of defensive back, linebacker. They used to call it the hero at Penn State. And he thinks that could help offset some of their depth issues at linebacker by maybe playing more of a safety type at that field linebacker spot. So to me, that was another thing that came out today. Hull touched on that a little bit earlier this summer, but to have the coordinator say, listen, we may be going more, you know, with a, 4-2-5, as opposed to your typical 4-3. That was something that was a little bit, not necessarily different, but you could see where they'll be doing some different things to help adjust for maybe some of their shortcomings at different positions. Yeah,
and you know, I think Bob Shoop had a great analogy there. He's a baseball guy, and he went to baseball to talk about where you in baseball you want to be strong up the middle. Same idea here with this defense. They want to be strong, obviously, at DT spots, of course, your two linebacker spots, and then up the middle in your secondary as well, with the cornerbacks outside and your safeties used as the guys in the middle in his analogy. And I think that that's what they're going to have to do. I mean, look, there's no way around the fact that, you know, a traditional 4-3-3-4 is going to be tough with the way the depth limitations are and the injuries to Ben Klein. I mean, it's the fact of the matter. But very complimentary today of Mike Hall. And, you know, he obviously represented himself well at Big Ten Media Days next week. Big season, I think, coming up for him. I don't think anyone's going to argue with you with that. But at the same time, you know, this is a guy that James Franklin said that, I don't know about you, I don't remember the questions or the second guessing of them moving Mike Hall inside. James Franklin said he remembered some of that, but they think he's big enough to play inside, and it would sure seem that way after seeing this.
Yeah, and I think you would have seen him there earlier, if not for a guy like Glenn Carson, who I thought was kind of a natural there for them the last couple of years. One of the other things on the defensive side of things that jumped out to me a little bit is they're really talking up their defensive line. I mean, I think they really like what they have at defensive line, and they talked about specifically doing special things for guys like Zettel and Deion Barnes to kind of shake them loose and be more playmakers. And I kind of like what I hear. When you think that they move two players from the defensive line to the offensive line, you know, before or during spring practice, that tells you a little something about the kind of depth that they had there. And I think I'm not getting the sense that that's a line of BS from them. I think that they really like what they see. Excuse me, we're looking around here. There's stuff going on around us, and there's music playing. We're just having some fun with it. But yeah, in terms of the defensive line, that's an area where they have some depth. And in the secondary, I had a chance to talk to Terry Smith. He talked about how important it is getting these young, fast players in, not necessarily as starters, but to help provide some of that much-needed depth.
Yeah, you know, first on the defensive line front, Bob Shoop was very highly complimentary of C.J. Olaney and Deion Barnes. He contends, his words, that they have the best 1-2 punch as anyone in the league. And you know, they very well may. I mean, these are two guys that Olaney and Barnes both were a little bit streaky last year. Bob Shoop was very adamant after the spring game that if you watch the tape, and we go back to Bill O'Brien, the same thing last season. You know, he was very adamant that if you watch the tape on Deion Barnes, he wasn't having as bad a year as everybody made it out to be. Whether that's true or not, it's up to interpretation. But then again, moving to the secondary, Terry Smith, you know, he told me that he actually does work with the whole secondary sometimes when Shoop's out with other groups of players. So, you know, there's a lot of experience there between Terry Smith and the secondary, Bob Shoop. And these guys like what they have. I mean, it starts with Jordan Lucas and Adrian Amos. We've heard those two names time and time again. But Bob Shoop called Ryan Kaiser the quarterback on the defense today. And these are, you know, this is a secondary that at least what they have, you know, they're pretty excited about it. And of course, the young guys coming in as well. Obviously, Terry Smith knows as much as anyone about those guys as a defensive recruiting coordinator. He helped recruit them and helped evaluate them. So they like what they're getting in the secondary, but obviously it has to come together on the field.
Yeah, the last area, special teams, Charles Huff spoke in the media room, and I had a chance to talk to him a little bit. I'm not sure if you talked to him at all, but you know, the one thing I asked him about is I said, when you were hired, you talked about how, and I'm paraphrasing, that fans are going to enjoy watching what his special teams do. And I said, well, what did you mean by that? And he's, you know, they're going to be going 1,000 miles an hour. If they're going to make mistakes, they're going to do it at full speed. That's an area, special teams, where, especially in the return game, where they've really, I'll say it, they've struggled. They were not very good under Bill O'Brien. That's an area that could really, really get better. You know, my gut on this, after listening to what some of the coaches are saying, I think you're going to see Akeel Lynch returning kickoffs, because they talked about how they like to have one of those bigger backs involved in the kick return game. And I would not be surprised if Mr. Jordan Lucas sees more time. The other thing that Huff said was that they are not going to be afraid to play their starters. Starting players, regardless, depth aside, that they think that highly of special teams, that even though there are issues due to the sanctions, that they're going to play. You know, Mike Hull is going to play a lot on special teams. So I would think, you know, when you're talking about the return game, Akeel Lynch, I think he could do some good things. And Jordan Lucas, you know, that guy to me just has a knack for doing things. So I think it would be fun to see him as a punt return guy.
Yeah, I think Akeel Lynch, you know, the way Charles Huff talked today, talking about, you know, 3 running backs, perhaps the last one of them is the kick returner. Well, Akeel Lynch is perhaps the 3rd running back in the rotation right now behind Zach Swinak and Bill Belton. So, you know, what Mark's saying is absolutely right. Akeel Lynch is a guy that could return kicks. He did a little bit in high school, not a lot, but he did do it a little bit in high school, and he's a guy that would fit that mold well. And then when you talk about punt returning, yeah, Lucas is an option, and there's a couple other ones out there as well. DeAndre Tompkins, Grant Haley, both of those guys did it and obviously have the speed to do it. So it's going to be interesting. But, you know, I think this time last year, you know, there were questions about special teams, but they were more of what you were going to get. I think you know what you're going to get here. You know, it might not be good, but it'll more likely be productive, and it's going to be filled with, you know, guys that know what they're doing. You know, Charles Huff made the point that they're going to use starters and they're going to use other guys, and because of that, you know, the depth will be limited to some extent because you don't have a lot of guys that know exactly what they're doing. But at the same time, the guys that do, I think there's more of them this year, and I think they've really drilled that home.
Yeah, we have a long time to talk about all this stuff. We won't get into it now, but how is Gullah going to do at punter if he's the guy? Is there any pressure on Fick and that sort of thing? But we have a lot of time between now and you know, the first game to kind of hash all that stuff out. But these were some of the highlights. Was there anything else real quickly, because we're probably running a little long, that you thought, or do you think we touched on the main
No,
things?
I think we got most of it. Bob Shoop and John Donovan continue to impress in the interview setting. They said a lot of things you've heard before, and I think it's a lot of football-specific things that are good to save for later when we can sort of break them out on the board and sort of get into more of the conversation of it. But no, you hit on it. This is a team that's ready to go to Ireland. They said they're not focusing on Ireland until 2 weeks into preseason. Then they'll start looking at UCF. I think it might happen a little bit more than that, but this is a team ready to go, and it starts today.
That's cool. Well, we appreciate everybody being with us. I'm Mark Brennan of Fight on State. Obviously, this is Greg Pickel. We'll be doing reports throughout this month. Open practices. We'll have fun with some of that. We don't know how many are going to be open, but we know the one later today, as we tape this, is going to be. So we're going to have a lot of fun with it. Fight on State's the place to be for all your Penn State football coverage. Once again, Mark Brennan, Greg Pickel, and we are out.